Thank you all for joining. This session, we're going to be talking about how to declutter your Salesforce org. This is a tremendously common issue, a hot topic for anyone of any size organization, whether it's a new organization or an old organization, because everyone is faced with this situation where basically someone will create, it could be a field, it could be a page layout, it could be a record type, it could be a process builder, and then for whatever reason, it's just not needed. Of course, they go ahead and they do it in production, not in a sandbox first. They do it in production, and then for whatever reason, it's just not needed. And no one bothers to take the time to actually delete it, to remove the field or multiple fields from the page layout, from creating roles and profiles that nobody needs and they're not assigned to anyone, creating the record types that they're like, we don't need those record types, and no one is deleting them. And before you know it, we have a lot of clutter. And when we look at that clutter, there's clutter on multiple sides. There's clutter from the perspective of the end user, the person who's looking at Salesforce, and things are confusing. They see more tabs than they need to see on the screen. There are more fields and more sections than they need to see on the screen. Every time they try to update a person's phone number, they have validation rules and they don't even understand what the validation rule is. So they just go ahead and put in random data into random fields until they can finally hit save. And now we have horrible quality data on top of a confusing and frustrating Salesforce configuration. So what we're talking about is how to go about decluttering your Salesforce org. So what I've done is I've actually broken this down. This can be a very overwhelming topic because regardless of the size of your org, it could be a very small org with only 5 users. It could be that you've only been using Salesforce for the last 6 months or last year. It doesn't even have to be a large Salesforce org. It doesn't even have to be a large company. And you could have a lot of clutter that needs to be addressed. So I've broken this down into a couple of key areas that I want to walk you through on how to go ahead and clean them up. Now, when I'm about to share something on my screen, and when I do, again, this is meant to be interactive. So let's touch on each one of these areas. Any questions, anything that I'll share my advice, my best practices as it relates to that item. And any questions or anything, it's meant to be interactive. So go ahead and bring your questions on. So first, let me go ahead and start sharing this one particular image. So here you can see where I break down the areas to focus on as it relates to decluttering, making sense out of your Salesforce org. And let's sort of look at them one by one. So the first one, I always start with the business processes. Now, by the way, I need to call this out first. I'm like, why is business processes all the way on top? And you see user interface is all the way on the lower right-hand side of the screen. Hang on, let's see where that noise is coming from. Okay, took care of it. Everything really starts the business process and understanding the business processes that you have going on within your organization. That needs to be the first thing that you focus on because everything else will fall under that framework. If you don't have a good understanding of what the business processes are, of what happens when a new lead or prospect comes into the organization, what pieces of information are we gathering from the lead or prospect? How do we decide who to assign the leads or prospects to? And then at what point are we expected to convert the lead? And how do we use opportunities? And who works on different kinds of opportunities? Who works on different kinds of customers or clients, whatever terminology you're using? You need to understand all of that first, because if you don't understand that, everything else that's represented on the screen will make absolutely no sense. You're going to go and unintentionally break things with the best of intentions because you're trying to clean it up. You're going to unintentionally break things or screw something up that is a critical element for some of the business processes. So the first thing that you absolutely need to do is you need to understand what are the key business processes that are being supported within Salesforce today. Who are responsible for those processes? What are those processes like? And when I say that, what you really need to do is you need to basically put yourself in the shoes of the employee on that team. You need to basically turn to your colleagues and say, okay, let's make believe I'm not the Salesforce admin. Let's make believe I'm in sales, I'm in business development. And then today is my first day on the job. What am I supposed to do? Okay, so the phone rings and someone calls in that we've never worked with before. What am I supposed to do? And it's not about looking at the screen in Salesforce. What is the, like, where is the equivalent of the employee manual? Teach me what it is that I'm supposed to do as part of my job. So you really need to understand that for not just one, for every business process that you have within your organization, where the business process is being reflected in some way in Salesforce. And you need to understand that with as much granularity as you can.
Not just
Yeah, go ahead.
understand. Yeah, but not just understanding. Well, a bit bad by our admin that not me, but what happened is some salesperson said, well, I don't need this. I don't know why they put it. It's they put all the field that they built in this process, and I don't need it. You could take
That's
it down.
exactly, so many, that's exactly.
Once we did that, a day later, some other roles from sales persons, where did my field go?
So you're 100% right. You're calling out exactly what I described earlier, where you're listening to someone as it relates to, here's what I want you to fix on the user interface. Here, I want you to get rid of this from the screen. And if you don't know the business processes first, you will screw something up. Something is going to break. And guess what? It's going to be your fault. You, the admin who did it. It's not going to be the fault of the person who asked you to remove it. It's going to be the fault of the person who actually removed it. And a lot of times when you remove things, you cannot reverse it. There's no undo button.
What
so
do
once
you mean?
once you delete the custom object, all of the data is gone. Okay? So that's really important. Once you delete the formula field, once you delete the validation rule, once you delete that process builder, someone is going to have to recreate it. And everyone's going to point the finger at the person who removed it, and they're going to blame them for it. So it's absolutely critically important before you roll up your sleeves, before you touch anything in Salesforce, you absolutely must understand the business processes. It is absolutely critical. You can't skip over it. So what I'm going to do now is let me share with you.
First, as best practice, take it out of the layout or you know.
No.
Deleting it.
I'm not talking about touching Salesforce. I'm talking about understanding the business process. Like I said earlier, you put yourself in the shoes of the brand new employee and you're asking questions. What is my job? What is it that I'm supposed to do? You're putting yourself not in the shoes of the employee who's the new Salesforce admin who's hungry to delete things. You're putting yourself in the shoes of the employee who is responsible for sales, for customer service, for marketing, of the non-admin Salesforce user. It is critical. You need to understand what the business processes are. So here you can see I'm sharing on my screen. And by the way, I will share this with all of you afterwards as a PDF. So you can see over here, I am showing you, let me get rid of some other stuff I have on my screen over here. So I'm giving you some outlines over here. And again, this is not meant to be a read along whatsoever. You guys know how to read. I can share this with you. But just skimming this, you will get a better understanding of what it is that I mean by understanding the business processes. You need to understand, first of all, what business processes are even being managed in Salesforce. And then from that, you need to understand what subgroups do we have within each business unit. It's not just sales, because within sales, we could have subgroups within sales. We could have consumer versus commercial. We could have government versus private sector. So there's a lot of subgroups that you might have within your organization that need to go quite a bit granular. Then, hang on one second.
If the case is an AMR case, if you try to assign it to AFM, we want an error message, right?
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. I hit mute all. If you want to unmute, you can unmute yourselves. I couldn't figure out.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just a question. I joined a bit late.
It's okay.
Whatever you're sharing, will we be getting a copy of it?
Yes, I will share with you a copy of the PDF. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Yep. So what you see over here is Then you identify all of the subgroups. After you identify all of the subgroups, we need to go even granular to understand which people are members of which subgroup. So let's say if we're talking about sales, and sales is broken down by government versus private, or consumer versus commercial. Which employees, who is in the commercial group? Who is in the consumer group? You need to get even more granular than that. Then you need to identify any existing documentation. I'm not trying to tell you to reinvent the wheel. If there's any documentation whatsoever, I don't care if it's written with a pencil or crayon on a piece of paper. I don't care if it's on a whiteboard. I don't care if it's a PowerPoint. Doesn't matter what the format is. Take any documentation that already exists. If not, you will have to create it yourself to see what kind of process maps are there. Or maybe there's an employee manual. Maybe there are just some checklists. Or maybe there are just some other guides of some kind that you can leverage that will give you some insight on what it is that these people in these groups, what is it that they do? Then you need to ask all kinds of questions like, who is involved? Which people are involved in each step of the process? Exactly what role do they play in the step in the process? When do they do it? In other words, do they do it all the time? Do they do it some of the time? Do they do it immediately within 12 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours, within the first 2 weeks of meeting that new lead, of closing the new deal, of the deal being lost? When is it that they are supposed to do whatever it is that they're being asked to do? Where is it that they do it? And when I say where is it that they do it, sometimes it's important to know that they're doing it outside in the field where they're doing it on mobile, or are they doing it at their computer? It's important to know whether they're doing it in a place where there's no Wi-Fi whatsoever, or they're doing it in a place where there is Wi-Fi. Or maybe they're doing it on an Excel spreadsheet, maybe they're doing it on a paper notepad. So where are they doing it today? Because I can guarantee as you're having these discussions and you're asking, what are the processes and who's doing what? I guarantee you will uncover many, many steps in the process that are not being done in Salesforce. And by the way, that's not necessarily a problem. You might find many opportunities there where they're doing things outside of Salesforce where it can be done within Salesforce. But as wonderful as Salesforce is, not every step in every single process in every single industry can or should be done in Salesforce. So there are many things that are done outside of Salesforce. You need to still have an understanding of where those things are being done, how they're being done, what tools are being used. You also need to understand probably the most important question of why. Why are they doing this step in the process? Because that will give you as an admin an opportunity to better evaluate, there might be a better way to do it. Because if what you're doing is, let's say, putting it on writing it out on a clipboard with a triplicate carbon paper so that you can give one copy to him and one copy to her and one copy you're putting in your own file cabinet, you might come up with a suggestion of, well, wait a minute, maybe there's a better way to do this. Because if the goal is so that everyone has a copy of it, maybe there are better ways to do that using modern technology. And then you become a hero by introducing efficiencies to the organization. Anyone have any questions on the things that I covered up here? If you want to talk, by all means, go ahead and unmute yourselves, by the way. All right, so over here, I then have, here are some additional questions to ask. What is this step about? Again, like, why are we doing it? What are the details are needed? I'm going to just skip over here. After we talk about the business processes, the next thing that we're going to focus on is the users. And when it comes to users, there's a lot that we need to think about. And even though the list over here is not complex, there's a lot of substance underneath it. So some of the most common problems that I've seen when it comes to the configuration of users within the Salesforce org, the things that are ripe for fixing, for decluttering, for simplifying, for taking corrective action. The first one, the most common, way too many Salesforce admins. I have heard the most bizarre reasons in the world why people have said that they need Salesforce admin access. I've heard people tell me, oh, I need to be a Salesforce, you need to set me up as a system admin so that I can log my calls and meetings. You need to set me up as a Salesforce admin so that I can pull reports and dashboards. You need to set me up as a system admin so that I can update my opportunities. Are you freaking kidding me? Like, those are all things that a system user, a regular standard user should be able to do. And if for whatever reason the standard user is not able to do that, there are many standard, out of the box, normal ways, appropriate ways, following best practices to give those features to those users. Maybe the reason why they don't have access to those features is because someone accidentally turned them off, or maybe someone removed the tab for reports and dashboards from the page layout. Maybe it's because someone removed the entire section for creating activities on the page layout. Maybe that's why they didn't have access to it before. But you don't need to be a system admin to be able to do that. The next thing that I've seen, incredibly common, aside from being just a license violation, is sharing licenses where multiple people are logged in as the same user. Now, I'm not even going to be talking about the legality of that. Let's forget about that. Let's make believe, for whatever reason, and they never would, let's make believe Salesforce said, no, that's okay, you can share licenses. Here's what's going to happen. You have 3 people sharing, logging in with the same username and password. And then people want to know, yeah, which activities are mine? What activity was assigned to me? Which are my customers? Which are my opportunities? Well, if you're all logged in as the same person, you have absolutely no way of knowing.
Dummy contact. A dummy contact that, you know, has a lookup.
And then let's see if your users are actually going to leverage that. And how is that going to help you when you're also looking at created by, last modified by, on the account, on the contact, on the opportunity, on every activity, on the cases, on the campaigns, on every record, every file, every record that you have associated with those objects. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So this is a huge problem, and you need to identify and you need to take corrective action. The other one is improper utilization or no utilization at all of roles and profiles, where they just have the 1 or 2, the standard roles and profiles, and like they're sort of random, like everyone is just assigned a single role in a single profile, and it's unanimous across the entire organization. And then everyone's confused as to why everyone has access to all data, why everyone can see everything for the entire organization, why everyone has access to all of these features that they shouldn't have access to. Everyone has access to all of these apps that they shouldn't have access to. Improper utilization of roles and profiles. And in addition, we also have permission sets. Maybe they're not using permission sets and they should be using permission sets. So what you need to do is you need to, first of all, identify all of these issues and then to figure out how to take corrective action on them. And all of this goes back to the first step that I had you focus on before, which is identifying the business processes. Because by identifying the business processes and by identifying, let's go back over here, let's scroll all the way back to the top over here, and identifying the key groups within the business and the subgroups and the different team members that are associated to each subgroup. It's only through that you will be able to identify, and then knowing who does what and when do they do it. You will, by going through all of this, you will be able to identify of all of the users in the team, who is expected to see what data, who is expected to have certain functionality, and for which users certain functionality should be removed because it's simply not relevant to their job. Even if it's okay for them to see certain records, for them to have certain functionality, if it's not relevant for their job, it is distracting. It is clutter on the screen and clutter in the database. If I am, for example, I am a summer intern and I am helping just the Northeast sales manager to clean up that person's database, and I do a search in Salesforce, I just do a search for the word John, there is no reason in the world why I should see data that relates to other regions of the world. No reason whatsoever. I should only be able to see data that is relevant to the person that I'm working for, the person that I'm expected to help. And I should only have access to even the fields on the screen that are appropriate based on what it is that I'm permitted to do or expected to do in my role as a summer intern. So you need to understand all of that. Once you understand all of that, then you need to make sure for yourself, this goes back to a question that many asked earlier of what's an area to, while some of us have a little bit extra time during this coronavirus crisis and everyone's working remote, something people can do to brush up on skills. One of the other things that everyone can benefit from, learn more about who sees what in Salesforce. And the link that I'm giving you over here is a link to a playlist that Salesforce put together. And so many times people, and when I say people, it's not only Salesforce admins, it's also the users. They think that it's like an on-off switch, that access in Salesforce is either whatever they have today or full-blown system admin access. It's just like a yes, no. It's not like that at all. Instead, the way I describe system access to different things in Salesforce, the way I describe it as layers of an onion. It is that complex. Because you could determine who should see entire tabs in Salesforce. First of all, who should even be able to log into Salesforce, when they should be able to log in, through what IP addresses they should be able to log in. You should also be able to control what tabs they should be able to see, let alone, even if they can see the contacts tab, which contacts, which records they should be able to see. Even when they're looking at a particular contact, they're looking at the Fred Flintstone contact, they should be able to know, they should be able to only see the fields that are relevant for them in the job that they have. And they should also only be able to see.
Question, David.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
So in my organization where I work,
Yes.
what we struggle for at this moment is, we do use a ERP system, okay? And we have ensured that, let me give you an example. So we have some opportunity. It is being captured. So the lead and everything is coming from Salesforce, and we synchronize or we transfer the data to the ERP system. And the ERP system sends back, all the fulfillment is done in ERP system, and it syncs back with the data, a lot of data. So how do you make sure the simplification in this scenario? So the scenario is, we have a lot of fields on the opportunity, like literally a lot, because we want to make sure that we capture data, and we probably have more than 20 fields on opportunity. And on top of that, we are synchronizing some data back from our ERP system on the sales order and everything to get a 360 view, okay? And that becomes like more 10 to 20 fields. So suppose on one opportunity, we have more than 30 fields. How do you say that we simplify that? Because all the data is necessary. We cannot reduce the number of fields. We cannot reduce, or we cannot say, okay, let the data of ERP be in ERP. We do need to have it. But so how do we make sure? Because even entering a new opportunity is like a big deal, because being a salesperson, if I talk to a salesperson, he says, oh, this field I don't want to fill on. There are so many things which I don't care about, but I need to fill in because your management needs this data to understand the business, if it is going right or wrong. So at the end, the business or the salesperson has to enter that kind of data. And then I hope you got my point. How do you say that we simplify it?
So what I'm hearing is that there's a couple of things going on. So first of all, it's about the business process. So what I'm hearing is that from a business process perspective, the data that's coming in from Salesforce, some of the fields or many of the fields, or maybe an overly burdensome number of fields are required on the opportunity because of the integration that we have with the ERP, and the opportunity won't be able to be processed appropriately by the ERP system through the integration that we have with the ERP unless certain fields are populated. Is that part of what I'm hearing? I'm just confirming.
One part is that. Other part is, moreover, our higher management wants to make sure that so for example, even if we are we are shipping a lot of products, so for that we do definitely need the data which we want. So one part is right, but there are also some part of the fields which are mandatory or necessary for our management, which does not concern our ERP. It's just our higher management wants to understand, or they want to capture these details so that they can improve in the business.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that this goes back to the business process in terms of who needs to see what, who needs to see certain pieces of information that are coming in from the ERP. Senior management cares about, but the sales rep does not care about. So that's what you're identifying in the business process that we have over here. And then when you're getting to the users, you need to make sure that the users should see only those things that were called out in the business process that are relevant to those users. So maybe while the sales rep is looking at the exact same opportunity as their manager or the executive who's the leader of the division that they're in within the organization, the executive should be able to see more information. This is what I'm hearing you say, the way I'm understanding it. The executive wants to be able to see or needs to be able to see more data on that opportunity than the sales rep cares to see on that opportunity. So,
but at the end, sales rep has to fill in those data as well.
Then it's simply a matter of training. Then what I'm hearing you say is everyone needs to be on the same page. This is the business process. The sales rep doesn't like what their executive is requiring of them. End of story. So in the end, it really has nothing to do with Salesforce. It has nothing to do with the integration. The end user training needs to happen. And basically they need to be told, this is your job. This is what your boss, it's not me as a Salesforce admin. This is what your boss wants. I didn't put it here because I felt like it. Your boss requires it. The organization requires it. You still want to get a paycheck from this organization? This is what you need to do. Don't like it? There's the door.
Great.
I mean, in the end, that's what it is. Because the sales, you can't have an executive who says, I require the following information from everyone on my team. And people on the team say, no, I don't want to do that. That's a lot of work. No kidding. Okay. Bye-bye. Anyway.
Yeah. One suggestion, the way that you're actually forming it is instead of trying to tell the salespeople to put this information in, you have to get executive sponsorship. So you have to go up the totem pole, explain what's going on, and then it has to come down from management to deliver that messaging. Because if you're the one, you're the admin that's saying you have to do this, you're just the admin, you're not my boss. So you need to find alignment and deliver the message properly that way, or else no one's going to really be listening to you. And it's going to go unnoticed if leadership doesn't know about it.
And the only way you will be, so Rob, I agree with what you just said, 1,000%, thank you. I think the only way you're going to be able to have some type of documentation that shows the consistent need within the organization is by doing that first step of documenting the business process.
Right.
I think that's the only way you're going to have it. That's the only way you're going to have something tangible. Otherwise, everyone's just pointing at the screen saying, get rid of this. And no, I need that. Don't get rid of it. But by having some document of a business process, that's where you're going to be able to turn to the executives and say, what we heard from you is that you're requiring all of these, right? Yeah. Okay. So when we talk to your team members, they're saying that, yeah, they don't want it. It's too much work. They don't want to populate all that. They don't even want it on the screen. And then when you're talking to the lower level sales reps, you're basically telling them, I'm sorry, but the executive said that this is what they need. And to Rob's point, take yourself out of the picture, let the two of them communicate together, and then you're golden.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that answered. Thank you.
Awesome.
And tell them about the disaster if they don't.
If they'll be on the unemployment line, you mean?
No, meaning that bad processes or bad documentations and things that they should cooperate with, not doing it, what the bottom line will be in a few months or days or weeks, what will
100%.
happen.
Yeah.
So tell them that it's a small effort now to maintain big problems later.
Now, by the way, like we're sort of like we're both addressing it while also slightly poking fun at the situation, because we've all been there, by the way, and it's painful. So we've all been in these situations where the system admin becomes the punching bag of the executives, the punching bag of the users, the lower level employees, that they don't want to do it, and it doesn't make sense to do it. But
punching bag of Salesforce problems.
Yeah, well, they're using Salesforce as an excuse, but really, like we talked about before, it really has nothing to do with Salesforce. Executives require the following data, even if Salesforce didn't exist. They require the following data, even if it's in Excel, even if it's in the form of an email, and the reps don't want to provide that data. But in the end, a lot of times, going back to Rob's point, by having that conversation coming from senior leadership directly to their team members, a lot of times meaningful discussions come about by saying, but wait a minute, you're still getting the same information. Why is it that you want that information? You really want that information because you want to find out the following the following thing, whatever that thing is. But guess what? You're able to identify that same thing in other ways without having all of that data. So a lot of times that is the outcome of having these conversations. And these are real conversations. These are not debates. These are not fights. And in the end, again, none of it has anything to do with Salesforce. It goes back to the why. Why is it that we want that information? And if everyone is on the same page in terms of why that information is needed, why we have this process, why we have this step in the process, if everyone can be on the same page with that, everything else falls in line. And again, that's why I keep saying everything starts with the business processes.
Right.
One last little bit of advice that I would give. It's very simple to run reports and segment on the field and be like, hey, leadership, you're asking, you know, everyone to fill out this field. 85% of the people are not filling out this field.
And by the way, I'm going to get to that a lot more later down, but yes, I'm totally with you.
We simply have made the things mandatory, and especially so what we did is, rather than making it mandatory at the earlier stage, we made it mandatory only at the closed one stage, you know, the stage where, okay, it is actually ready for synchronizing with the ERP system. But that's what makes it annoying, because it is not star marked, and they simply kind of change the stage and it says, oh, you need to fill these fields, and then they have to navigate. So sales rep just get a bit irritated with it.
Okay, so do me a favor, Shruti, let's, this is a very important conversation, but let's bring it up when we go lower down to data quality. This is very, very important. Please don't let me forget that this is a topic we need to talk about in the data cleanup section, because this goes back to making too many fields required and having validation rules, and users who are just going to type in anything. They're going to have, I can't save a lead unless an email address is there. Well, guess what? The person did not give me the email address, and I'm putting in unknown@gmail.com. This is a very, very common issue, and it's very painful. So let's revisit it when we get down to data cleanup. Okay.
Cool.
David, back to Sruti's situation, because we're kind of going through the same thing in our org.
Yep.
You might need to have some tough discussions with your top executive level, because it might be that they're not clear on what they want or what the process is. And it's kind of like assumed because they're an executive, they know. Not necessarily the case. So you might have to have a Q&A session with them to see what it is that they need, and what they're needing and what they're saying they need might be two different things, but you have to keep asking that why to figure that out.
Sure. I just realized there's a whole lot going on in the chat, and I'm oblivious because I'm focusing on the conversation. So if there's something I need to focus on in the chat, someone let me know. All right. Karen, thank you for that insight. That's definitely very, very important. Let's just go back right over here to the who sees what. This is also very important. As system admins, you need to be familiar with everything that's basically covered in this playlist. And as you are, even if you might already be familiar with it and you're watching, you can see these are relatively quick, easy, painless videos for you to watch. And as you're watching it, you might be realizing, wait a minute, I could easily simplify a lot of my screens just from field level security perspective, because we have so many users who right now, when they look at the contact, account, opportunity screen, they see so much on the screen that is completely irrelevant, and there's no need to make a different page layout for them. You could simply, through field level security control, to hide those fields from people with certain profiles, and you can address it that way. So please make sure that you're familiar with the Who Sees What series. It will help you exponentially. So let's talk about how to address some of the issues with users. You're going to see by running Salesforce Optimizer, that's going to help you tremendously in order to assess your own orgs, sharing rules, admin permissions, how many people have admin permissions, who has certain profiles, which profiles you have that aren't assigned to anyone. It happens all the time. Permission sets that you might have that are not assigned to anyone, just get rid of the clutter. You might even forget that you have certain permission sets. You might have permission sets that are overlapping, and then you wonder, wait, I don't understand. I updated this permission set. Why are they still able to see whatever it is? It's because you have multiple permission sets that are basically conflicting with each other, overlapping, and causing chaos for you as the admin, not necessarily for your end users, but for you. It'll also let you see, by the way, users who have not logged in recently. This is pretty eye-opening and leads to some very interesting conversations. First of all, at the very least, you have users who are not logging in and maybe they don't really need to log in. As the admin, you're now identifying users that are hogging up licenses that you can free up for other people who actually need access to Salesforce. Anyway, after you go ahead and do that, it will allow you to go ahead and configure your roles appropriately and configure your profiles appropriately. And the way I like to describe, especially like when I'm teaching people how to be admins in the first place, I usually, in broad strokes, it's not it doesn't apply in all situations, but in broad strokes, the way I define what is the difference between role and profile. Roles will help you define data security. Who has permission to see what? Profiles, generally speaking, profiles will let you determine, configure who has access to certain functionality and who does not have access to certain functionality in Salesforce. Anyone have any questions on what I talked about as it relates to users before we move on to the next area? Okay. Next area is data architecture. So what you need to do over here is, first of all, you need to identify all of the objects that are being used in Salesforce. You need to understand what on earth they're being used for. Are they actually needed? Can't tell you how many times I uncover objects that someone created directly in production, no records, no one's using it, no one has any idea what it was supposed to be. At least identify it and get rid of it. You might also identify that you have multiple objects that are meant to do the exact same thing. I can't tell you how many times I have uncovered custom objects that are meant to host information about people. People. So custom objects that are called volunteers, students, patients, doctors, parents. It's terrible, because what you're going to have inevitably is you're going to have, it could just even be in one situation.
Here's a good one, opportunity.
Yes, I worked in one Salesforce org where I uncovered an object called reports. Yeah, I worked in the same org, custom object called weekly calls. Like what?
Even better, David. I had an org where they created a custom object called account. By the way, if you do that, you can no longer use regular account fields in email templates at all.
Good to know that. That's good to know.
To Linda's point, in defense, or I shouldn't say in defense, to better elaborate on the most common use case I found for that is particularly in financial services sector. In the financial, it's true in other industries as well, but in the financial services sector, very often the account is like imagine you're going to a bank and you're opening a bank account. You're not opening an investment account. Where
that's exactly what it was, David. It was insane. And
the account, usually it can be mapped to an opportunity. Even if it's not, I explain, and I'm glad you brought this up, Linda, because I wasn't even thinking of going in this direction as it relates to this topic. So even if, let's say even if it's not mapped to an opportunity and they need to do something else with it, they need to, and they can't let go of the terminology account. Basically, I explain to them, usually the conversation will go as follows. So a senior leader within the organization will say, but can you simply rename what we have in Salesforce as accounts? Can you rename it and call it companies? I encounter this all the time, by the way. Can you rename it companies? And the answer is, of course we can. Takes about 4 seconds. You find the right place to rename the object, the standard object, and you can rename it all over the place. Well, you're not really renaming it all over the place. There are always going to be legacy places, including the APIs, where that legacy standard default naming convention will still apply. Now, what will happen is as follows. 6 months down the road, 2 years down the road, at some point down the road, one of the following things will happen. someone will, let's say they go ahead and they create a custom object called accounts. They rename the accounts object and call it companies. So someone is going to watch a YouTube video or see release notes about a new feature on the accounts object. And they're going to look and they're going to be like, we don't have anything like that. Our screen, like, is it broken? Like, I don't understand. And they're going to be lost. And they're not going to know, like, how do we even make sense of any of this? Our account screens are completely different. We have none of the functionality that we see in any YouTube video or do any Google search on functionality that's associated with accounts in Salesforce. And we have none of that in our company. And then the opposite is going to happen as well, where they have an issue and they call customer service. They reach out to Salesforce support and they say, I'm having the following issue. I want to be able to merge accounts. How do I merge accounts in Salesforce? You know what happens when they're going to call customer support? You know what happens when they're going to go to YouTube? They're going to see the native functionality on merging accounts, and that's not going to work for them. So it opens up such a terrible can of worms that becomes so hard to back out of that my recommendation is I basically beg them, technology-wise, yes, we can rename the standard objects to call it whatever you want. You want to call it kazoo, you can call it kazoo. However, it's going to be very difficult for you and all of your future employees to remember that it was renamed from contacts to kazoos. And then everyone's going to struggle using native out-of-the-box APIs, apps on the App Exchange, leveraging customer support, because we decided that we're so special, we needed to rename the standard objects to whatever it is to match our terminology. If you're so special, yes, you're that special, and nothing out of the box for Salesforce is really going to work for you as easily as it does for those who did not rename it. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that topic because I can go on forever on it. So over here on the objects,
I told them, you want to be special? I'll make you a record type, especially for you.
Yeah, a lot of times that becomes a challenge as well, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it does. And I would caution that I actually had a certified consultant or a Salesforce partner that created a custom object called contract. And when I came in on board, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare to detangle that web. So it's not always just a rogue admin out there. Sometimes you get, and they could have been pushed in a certain direction. I didn't have the details. All I know is that I went looking for a contract and found it in custom objects instead of the standard. It was horrible.
What's even worse is sometimes you find multiple custom objects with the same name, which is actually hard to do. Because native out of the box, Salesforce will not allow you to do that, which means that you had to first go and name it something else, and then you went back and changed the label to make it match the other object that you created with the same name.
David. Same name on fields.
Yes.
David. First name.
Yes.
Did you put that on the Org Confessions website?
I did.
Yeah, I thought that sounded familiar.
Yeah, there's... And sadly, it's not that unique. These things happen often. So there's...
Actually, what's not unique that I see a lot of putting the same name in fields, not in objects, but in fields.
Yes, yes, 100%. And by the way, this is exactly...
Smart and they think it's good.
This is exactly on the exact same topic of data architecture, where I can't tell you how many times someone who was not trained in Salesforce and knows really nothing about database architecture, and they looked on the page layout and they did not see on the account screen, they did not see the native standard out-of-the-box field called industry because it was removed from the page layout. So what do? They just go ahead, they don't even look to see if it exists already. They just go ahead and they create a brand new custom field called industry. And they make it an open text field. And then people wonder, how come on mine, it's a dropdown, and by my colleague over here who sits right next to me in the same department, it's an open text field. And then someone wants to know, how come I can't pull a report of all of our accounts by industry and get the same data that my colleague gets? What a disaster.
They're special.
Yeah, they're all very special. So you need to identify, so going back to what I have here on the screen, so you need to identify, we're starting at the very top, we're starting at all of the objects, identify all of the objects that you have. Why do you have them? Why is it needed? Who needs to use it? Is it duplicated somewhere else? What kind of data is stored in there? Who needs to have access to it? Who should not have access to it? Then you need to identify within each object, we have record types. And we're basically doing the same kind of auditing. First of all, what kind of record types do we even have? Do the users even understand the differences between the different kinds of record types? Are they even justified? I can't tell you how many times I've seen situations where people created a record type without even thinking through that they might actually have a scenario where that record, let's say it's a person, and they put record types of, let's say, student, volunteer, parent. Well, what if the parent is also a volunteer? Record type is not appropriate here. Like, you can't do that, because then it's going to force you, if you want to have that same individual listed both as a parent and as a volunteer, and you're using volunteer as a record type, it's going to force you to choose one or the other, or create a duplicate. No, that doesn't make any sense. There are different ways to handle it. So you need to ask all of these appropriate questions. Next, we're getting to the level, we're going more granular. We're looking at the fields. Look at every single field that you have in the object. Why do we have it? What type of data is stored in here? And even look at the formatting. I can't tell you how many times people expect, let's say just by the label, they expect the data that's inserted to be a date field. And then they want a report of all of the records where that date field is populated within a certain time frame. If it's not formatted as an actual date field, but simply the label says, let's say, expiration date, the label on that field says expiration date, but the field itself is not a date field, good luck to you doing reports. Good luck grouping any data. Good luck trying to create any kind of automation with alerts or notifications or reminders based on the date that's in that date field. Or I could say the same thing as it relates to currency fields. So there's a lot of things that you need to really look at. And I realize this is a lot of work, which is why I'm giving you this kind of documentation to help you make sense out of it without pulling your hair out, that you should feel that this documentation is thorough. You can still get even more granular than what I have here, but it gives you a general framework to let you work through your org, to review everything that you have in your org and make sense out of it all. You need to look at the field security settings. Who should be permitted to it, and who should be permitted to see it, and who should not. Then, to what extent is it populated? We talked earlier, it was mentioned in the chat, we didn't really talk about it per se. Field Trip happens to be a really, really good tool for this. And I have the links to it down below, by the way, in the same document. So Field Trip is a tool that basically, there are actually many different tools that will help you for this. Field Trip happens to be like an amazing one that will basically do an audit through, actually, Optimizer has some of this also. Fields that are not often populated, that are worth considering. If it's not, there could be some justified reasons why it's not populated. So in other words, it's not populated because it's still critical information, but it's critical information that we need to capture only with certain exceptions, where we appreciate the fact that it doesn't happen often, that checkbox doesn't need to be populated, but we still need to have that checkbox for when the situation does come up, we need to have it available. Or another situation is it's a relatively new field, or we haven't trained our users on how to use that field. That's why it's not populated. So just because it's not populated does not automatically mean we should delete it. It means we need to better understand what's going on here. Why is it not being populated? And of course, you could have a field that's not populated and it's a real problem. And it's a problem, maybe it's a problem, the fact that people are not populating it, or it's a problem that we have this clutter on the screen that just nobody needs. Maybe we should get rid of the field. Next, you need to look at whether or not we have dependent pick lists, whether or not dependent pick lists make sense, whether or not we have validation rules. Now, let's talk about validation rules a little bit. People go a little bit crazy when it comes to validation rules. Oh, can I make it that you can't switch, like we talked about a few moments ago, we can't switch an opportunity to a particular stage until certain fields are populated. Okay, that's all fine and dandy. Now, first of all, what happens when you actually delete the field? Well, Salesforce will give you an error. You can't delete the field because it's connected to a validation rule. So first you need to update the validation rule. But, excuse me, more often than not, what happens is people go a little bit nuts with creating so many validation rules that they don't even train their users, nor do they set up in the validation rule itself. They don't set up the notification to give insight to the user, to explain to the user, here's what you need. Here's why you can't save the record just yet. Here's the kind of information, the kind of fields that you need to populate. And the users weren't trained on it. So from the user's perspective, Salesforce sucks because they can't move an opportunity from one stage to another because they keep getting all kinds of errors. So they just randomly put in all kinds of different stuff all over the place and they hit save on the record. Or guess what happens? They don't use Salesforce at all and they just use Excel because it's way easier. So you need to be pretty careful when it comes to validation rules are awesome when used appropriately. Use that of hand, just like anything else, it can create a disaster and it can backfire on you tremendously. Any questions on any of this? I don't mean to be hogging up all the talking. I want you guys to be engaged. Questions on anything I talked about?
You know what the problem is with the, so we did use the validation rules, as I said, right? So what we did is, not at the starting stage, but yeah, when they are very happy about, okay, we won the deal and this and that, and then they have to fill in some fields and everything. So they are a bit, they do fill it, but they still just get annoyed because validation rule is something, it does not give a star mark. It's just like when you try to save, it then throws an error. And
right.
We made sure that it is populated near the field, not on the top, like exactly fill this field, fill that field. But still, what happens is the new users come up and say, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. So let's address that aspect of it, because you're actually bringing up another element that I was not thinking of necessarily covering, which is how to give, I'll use the phrase in-app guidance. I'm not really talking about it from the Salesforce functionality perspective, but that can work also. The in-app guidance of basically before the user actually does that thing, whatever it is, to remind them here's what's needed. So one of the things that you can do is in Salesforce, in Lightning, on the page layout, you can create rich text components on the page layout. And with those rich text components, you can basically give that information to the user on the page layout itself. You could also use the in-app guidance that Salesforce gives, which is like a pop-up that comes up, when they get to a certain kind of a page, they give them the information, maybe even a link to a video that teaches them, trains them, reminds them, here's what you might need at this point in time. But another way of doing it is directly on the page itself by having a Lightning component, which is a rich text component, and it's plain text. And basically it says, when you have this type of opportunity, and it's in this stage, in order to move it to the next stage, you will need to populate the following fields. So it's just plain text. It's informative and it's right there on the side, sort of as a reminder. So it's one thing that you might want to think about.
Right. Okay.
And that helps ease it. That helps. Usually reps will be actually appreciative of that because they think of it as help text that's in their face.
Right. Okay.
Instead of them having to remember everything.
Yeah.
All right, let's go down a little bit more. Let's take a look at then you need to start looking at all of the different page layouts that you have associated with each object. I can't tell you how many times there are page layouts that are not even assigned to anyone or anything. Just get rid of them, because for you as a system admin, anytime you need to make a change to something, you need to be like, wait a minute, which page layout is it? We have 15 page layouts, only one of them is actually assigned. Just get rid of the clutter if it's not needed. So make sure that, and of those that you are keeping, make sure that they're actually optimized, that things make sense, things are logically in the same groupings, that things are appropriate. Make sure things that should be removed from the screen are removed from the screen. If that makes sense for some of your users, maybe it makes sense to create more page layouts. The answer is not always just delete stuff. Sometimes you need to create additional page layouts so that certain users see things maybe in a different sequence than other users directly on the page itself. So you need to think about some of those things. Now, when it comes to Lightning record page layouts, one of the beautiful things is, I'm just going to jump down right over here, where you can utilize dynamic Lightning components, which means basically you have a component that's on the screen and you can make it dynamically visible by putting in filters to determine for which users and in which instances should this component even appear on the screen itself. So it's something I touched on before when we were talking about the validation rules, but this is really, really powerful for you as the system admin to set up for your users. And for your users, it's going to feel like the pages are far more intuitive. And technically, you are not creating additional page layouts. You're simply putting Lightning components on the screen and building in the filtering criteria to determine when they're either visible or not visible. Any questions on any of that?
So in simple terms, that means that Lightning components give us the feature wherein, so as I said, we have multiple number of fields, like more than 20 fields. Suppose we don't want to see them while entering it in the opportunity, we can control that it is not visible. And then it's like when it is being populated, then we can just show the details. Is that?
So that you're actually bringing up something else that's not available yet. I believe that that is coming soon. And I am super excited for that feature to come out.
What is that?
What I'm talking about, what was that, Joy?
This is Karen, I'm sorry. What feature is that that's coming out?
Trying to think what it's called. Basically where you can take certain fields that are and basically put them into it. I think they're calling it dynamic forms. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. It would showcase that Dreamforce. Where basically you could take certain fields from the page layout, put them into a different like Lightning component itself, and then place that component wherever you want on the page layout.
Oh, nice.
And apply dynamic filtering to it as well.
Wow. I've been using quick actions to sort of put people like in an opportunity where the stages change when they need certain fields filled out at certain stages. And that's not a common occurrence, but we have that. And it's awesome. So when you change the stage, you have your little quick action with the fields required. No validation rules. It's really nice.
But it's also very limiting. To do
of course. This is
I'm totally with you. Yes. So what I'm talking about, for those of you who are not familiar with it, I just randomly clicked on any record over here. So just to show you, I'm going to go into edit mode over here, edit page. And any component that we have here. So it could be, for example, let's say this entire component. So I'm clicking on the right-hand side over here, this entire component, which contains 2 different tabs. So if I decide, you know what, only certain users should see that, other users should not see that, I can go here and I can, on the lower right-hand side, let me sort of rewind a little bit. How did I even get here? Where on the lower right-hand side, it says set component visibility, and you can click where it says add filter, and you can filter based on either attributes of the record itself. So here I am on the account. So maybe this is whatever this section happens to be, whatever's contained in that Lightning component. Maybe I only want it to be displayed for accounts in the state of New York. So I can go here and I can say account, and I can choose, let's say, billing state, contains or equals, and I can put in the value. I could do it based on attributes of the record, the device, whether or not they're desktop or mobile, or over here under advanced, I can go here and I can choose based on, let's say, the user. And let's say the users, watch this, I could choose any attribute that's on the user. So this could be what department they're in. I could also drill down, I could do based on their email address. So when the CEO says, only me, it's only for me, and I want to be able to see the following things when I go to the following screen, you could use this functionality in order to display it. Or alternatively, you can drill in over here. You can see you have profile and you have role. So you can drill in and say, only display this to people of the following role or the following profile. Or some of you might have noticed that earlier, one of the other options was I could have chosen a permission set. So someone who has a particular permission set. So I could choose over here, custom or standard permissions, and you could choose any custom or standard permissions that might have been assigned to them. So you can get really creative. This is really, really powerful. And here it happens to be, the Lightning component happens to contain 2 tabs in it, but this applies to any component at all. So in theory, it could be, whoops, I don't even know what I clicked on over there. So like before I was talking about using a rich text component, I can go here, I can slap this on the screen. I can say, you know, this is my simulated text, and I can go over here lower down and I can set what attributes of when it should appear or not appear on the screen. And that is really, really powerful. So that's a way that you can give that type of guidance for your users.
But can you go back once again to that?
Yeah. Yep.
So what my point was, if you go back to the component, we can do it component based. So find this activity chatter and that can be done. But what about the fields on the detailed record
No,
page?
so my point, no, so my response to that was you cannot do it yet. However, that is a feature that my Salesforce showcased during Dreamforce as something that's going to be coming out soon. I believe off the top of my head, it's called dynamic forms.
Okay, and any clue that soon is like next summer or anything?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, no problem.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anyone else have any other questions on anything that we talked about so far or anything you think we should have talked about so far? Okay, I'm not monitoring the chat because I'm sort of focusing on the conversation. But if there's something I should be looking at the chat, please feel free to call it out verbally.
I would definitely want to have a longer chat on the in-app guidance, but maybe I'll just reach out to you individually.
Yep, by all means.
Awesome.
Yep. In-app guidance is really cool. So by the way, for those of you who have not used it, some of you might be familiar with tools like WalkMe. And I think this is an interesting area. So what WalkMe does is WalkMe basically has overlays that you could put in. So think of it sort of like an end user manual. It could be in the form of videos, it could be text, it could be links that you can set up so that certain kinds of users, you could even put together a curriculum, that certain kinds of users should get assigned certain curriculum or certain content that should be sort of like prompted for them on the screen. And on specific screens, certain kinds of users, even certain fields, to sort of teach them how to use the field, how to use the functionality on the screen, how to use a certain button. So I think this is, and WalkMe has been pretty popular for quite some time. I think this is an interesting time where it looks like Salesforce is sort of taking baby steps in that direction of exactly what WalkMe is doing, which I find pretty fascinating. So it's not nearly as powerful as what WalkMe does, but it's getting there. It looks like it's going in that direction. So we'll see how that evolves. All right. So as we're looking at our objects, we need to take a look at all of the automation that we have going on within each object in Salesforce, which includes the validation rules, which we talked about. What kind of workflow rules do we have? What kind of process builders do we have? Does it make sense to consolidate those process builders instead of having separate ones that are all touching the same object? What kind of lightning flows do we have? What kind of approval processes do we have associated with the object? Because as you're doing that, again, going back to where we started at the beginning with the business processes, that will give you the clarity, that will give you the guidance for yourself, that as you're evaluating each one of these objects, it will give you the understanding of, does this make sense or does this not make sense? Because what I heard with the business process doesn't match with what I'm seeing over here in terms of the approval process or process builder or the workflow or validation rules. Like it's not in sync. This will give you tremendous opportunities to be able to take corrective action where your users themselves will struggle to be able to articulate it for you. So this is really powerful for you as the admin. And some of the critical questions that you're going to need to think about over here is, do you yourself, do you understand all of the pieces of automation that we have going on within the org? Do we understand all of the business processes associated with all those pieces of automation that we have? And are those pieces of automation still relevant? It could be that automation was created at a time where it was relevant. The process was different than what it is today. And maybe some of the automation could be turned off. Maybe we can eliminate some of it. Maybe people are frustrated with the automation. They didn't even understand why certain fields were getting populated. To them, it was, I don't know, it's one of those quirky things about Salesforce. It was because some automation was built based on a request by someone, and maybe it's time to turn it off or modify it to some degree. And whether or not there's any inactive automation that maybe is appropriate to delete just to get rid of the clutter that you as the admin see when you're logged into Salesforce. So here are some apps that can help you with everything associated with this step. You can see over here, I'm giving you the link to Field Trip. Some other tools I'm giving, Salesforce Optimizer is another incredibly powerful tool. Both Octopus and Config Workbook, also great tools. Off the top of my head, they are free. Let's just take a look to confirm. These tools are really, really good just to help you get a quick sense of what's going on within your org. Config Workbook in particular, basically what it will do is it will create an Excel spreadsheet for you where each object is represented as a separate tab. It will show you all the different automation that you have going on. It'll give you a list of every single field, what type of field it is, what kind of permissions are associated with the field. Super, super powerful stuff. So this is a great way that's going to help you accelerate the process for creating the documentation that you need for yourself to evaluate, to review everything that you have going on. But again, it's only going to make sense if you understand the business processes. It always goes back to the business processes.
David, are you going to give us a copy of this so we have the links?
Yes, yes. I'm going to give this to you as a PDF.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
David, do any of those apps do business process mapping?
No. So if you ask me for a tool for business process mapping, my recommendation is elements.cloud. The truth is you could absolutely use anything. I've seen people use PowerPoint or Google Slides. I've seen people use Microsoft Word. I've seen people use Excel. I personally also love using, aside from Elements Cloud, Lucidchart. So it really does not matter. What I'm going to say is there's no magical tool that's really going to make it easier than others. It's whatever tool you're comfortable with. One of the huge benefits of leveraging Elements Cloud is that once you have that process map documented in Elements Cloud allows you to take it way more granular than that and then tie it directly back and connect it to the actual Salesforce configuration of the pieces of automation, the workflow rules, the fields, the validation rules. So this way, when someone is looking, it goes full 360. When someone is looking at a validation rule with Elements Cloud, by seeing that link, you will see the reasoning behind and the steps in the process behind that validation rule. You will understand the why. Why do we have that validation rule? Way faster by doing it in Elements Cloud. So you can have everything connected to each other. So that's one of the reasons why I think Elements Cloud is just really cool.
Cool.
Any other questions on any of this? By the way, one of the other things that Elements Cloud allows you to do is if you have, I talked before about like your Config Workbook or Octopus that allows you to create an Excel spreadsheet, like an output of the actual config as you have it. With Elements Cloud, you can also upload attachments. So the attachment could be a Google slide doc, or it could be an output from Lucidchart, or it could be something that someone wrote on a whiteboard. You snapped a picture of it and just saving that as an image. You can also attach those things in Elements Cloud as well to have easily accessible to further elaborate on what is the process or what is the reasoning or business justification behind any element of configuration in Salesforce.
Yeah, I saw that functionality at Dreamforce actually, where they made that whiteboard image available for end users on the user help, the info.
Exactly. Yes. And a lot of times, you know, it's funny because we think initially that it's really just the system admin, the Salesforce admin who needs that kind of documentation. But a lot of times it makes so much sense. Going back to what we were talking about that Shruti brought up earlier, where like the validation rules or even the fields on the screen, the users are frustrated. Why do we have it? Sometimes it makes a lot of sense to give that visibility to the end users, for them to understand the why. Here's why we have that validation rule. Here's why we have this entire section on the screen. It's about this process.
And then he remembers that he asked for it.
Right. Yes.
Well, you explain the process and the logic, and then he says, "Well, that's really makes it. You know what? I think I requested that."
It happens. It happens often. Yes. All right, ready to move on to integrations? And just to give you all a sense, going back to where we are over here, we talked about business processes, we talked about users, we talked about the data architecture. Next, we're talking about integrations, data cleanup, and the user interface. We're good so far? All right, so integrations. This could be a minefield. Let me just scroll to the appropriate place in the document. So first of all, we need to think about what are integrations? What integrations do we have? And very often, many Salesforce admins or senior executives will say, we don't have any integrations with Salesforce. I don't understand. I don't even know what an API is. Really? Do you have a synchronization with Gmail or Outlook? That's an integration. Because, and by the way, that's a very, very common integration that can cause a hell of a lot of problems. And when I say that, I'm not trying to rip on those integrations. The integrations do exactly what they're supposed to do. So for example, if it was set up so that everything in my Outlook calendar or Gmail calendar is going to appear in Salesforce, then that's exactly what it's going to do. So if I have my doctor's appointment for my foot doctor on my calendar in Outlook or Gmail, and it was set up that it's going to synchronize and it's going to get pushed into Salesforce, all of my colleagues are going to see that I have a doctor's appointment tonight, that I have a date with my wife, that they're going to see if my contacts are all set up to sync between Outlook and Salesforce, then my babysitter, my accountant, my mother-in-law from Outlook is going to get synced into Salesforce. And now everyone's going to have access to that information. It's going to do exactly what it's meant to do. Keep everything in sync. And a lot of users are like, wait, but that's not what I wanted. Then why did you set it up that way? So integrations can be awesome when set up appropriately. They could be horrible when set up inappropriately. And we need to think about what integrations we have, what we want with those integrations, and what problems, if any, need to be addressed through those integrations. So first of all, let's understand what are they? What kinds of problems we can have? Well, we can have all kinds of problems with integrations as it relates to, let's call it mystery data that's suddenly appearing in Salesforce and no one understands why. It's appearing in Salesforce because someone put it in another tool that was set up to push the data into Salesforce. Or it could be the other way around. It was set up in Salesforce to push the data from Salesforce into some other tool. So if you're wondering why you see someone else's contacts in your Outlook, it's because they created the contact, they put it into Salesforce, and you have it set up that it's going to synchronize to your Outlook. So guess what? It's going to appear in your Outlook, which then you're going to access on your mobile phone. It's doing exactly what it was meant to do. And then what can you do about them? So let's look at the most common types of integrations. So the most basic integration that you're going to find is going to be the some kind of web form, where some type of form that's on the web, someone goes ahead and fills it out, they hit submit, and it gets pushed into Salesforce. And those look like, it could be contact us forms, it could be download a white paper forms, submit a customer support ticket form, sign up for our newsletter form. And the question is, what is it that we have set up? What is it going to do? Are we looking for duplicates? Are we merging the duplicates? Are we just randomly creating whatever is filled out in that form is just creating a brand new, maybe contact and account, maybe it's a lead, maybe it's a contact account and a customer support ticket. What is it creating in Salesforce, and what do we want to do about it? Now, there are spammers who are just going, or sometimes people just set up like robots that are essentially going out and filling out all kinds of random forms with random gibberish, and it's creating clutter for you in your system. So we need to look at all of the web forms that we have, get an understanding of how are they set up, what kind of integration do we currently have, and what is it, maybe it's set up appropriately. I'm not at all saying that every web form is a problem. I'm saying we need to make sure that it's set up the appropriate way, that it's doing what we expect it to do, and it's being handled appropriately when it comes into Salesforce. And of course, we need to look at Outlook and Google, especially as it relates to, when I say Google, we're talking about Gmail, we're talking about the Google Calendar, Google Contacts. We need to make sure if we have contacts and our calendar synchronized, that it's actually being set up the way that we want and expect it to be set up. And then, of course, there are apps that have been downloaded from the App Exchange that connect any other system to Salesforce. And another type of integration that is commonly found, I refer to them as the DIY, the do-it-yourself integration tools like Zapier and Workato that will allow you to connect all kinds of other things, other systems to Salesforce. Those could be incredibly powerful. Again, I'm not at all saying with a blanket statement that they're all problematic. They could be incredibly powerful. They can introduce some magic, but when set up inappropriately, they can introduce a whole lot of clutter into the system that a lot of people are saying, I don't know where the heck it's coming from, but there's all this junk that always appears. So we need to understand what that's all about. And then we have other integration types that include not only custom APIs where in-house someone built, I shouldn't say in-house, it could have been done, someone external could have been hired to create a custom API between Salesforce and some other system. The most common types are ERP systems like Shruti was talking about earlier, as well as financial systems. Financial systems could be custom homegrown financial systems. It could also be things like QuickBooks, which is a very common disaster of an integration with Salesforce. So what you really need to do is you need to find all of those system integrations. One good place to go, this is not going to catch everything, but one good place to look is simply under setup, under installed packages. That will at least show you what has been installed as either an App Exchange app or maybe a custom app that managed package that someone provided to you, to your organization, that you might have set up. Also ask any other internal admins, developers, or CRM leaders, because chances are that they might know about some other custom APIs or some other, someone set up a Zapier at one point and completely forgot about it, that it's feeding data into Salesforce, maybe from a Google Sheet, just feeding data into Salesforce, and everyone sort of forgot about it. So you need to sort of ask around at who might know about some other things. Look for users that are labeled as integration users. That will give you a hint whether or not you have some integrations going on, and to at least allow you to start asking some questions of what is this all about. Again, I'm not at all saying all integrations are bad, not whatsoever. But when set up inappropriately, it could lead to a lot of trouble. And of course, look for any mystery records and look to see who they were last modified by or created by. And we're going to be asking the same, essentially, it's the same fundamental questions that are hard to have internally within the organization. Why? Why on earth do we even have this integration? Let's take a look at how it was currently configured. So, and what you need to explore over here is every time a new record gets created in the other system, what is it that we want or expect it to do? Does it automatically just create a brand new record back in Salesforce? Does it perhaps look for a matching record? And based on what attributes does it find that match? And then what happens to the information that's submitted? And what if the information that was submitted through the, let's say the web form, and let's say we're doing a match and the person made a typo in their job title and it's doing a match based on the email address and it's simply overwriting the existing record with the typo that they just entered through that web form. So what's going to happen exactly? Is the incorrect information going to overwrite the legacy information, the information that I as the rep populated yesterday? Is going to overwrite it with the typo that the person just submitted through the web? So we need to explore and understand all of these things. And again, this will help you as the admin uncover a lot of the mysteries, a lot of the frustration that your end users might be experiencing. Is the configuration exactly what we expected it to do? What modifications are needed for it? And then go ahead and modify those integrations as needed. Any questions on integrations?
Maybe a quick recommendation.
Yes.
I'm really a big fan of using custom metadata, and that is an awesome tool to quickly change integrations that are existing and you need them to do something else on the fly.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
David, I have to ask him, maybe, I hope that, I'm assuming that a lot of these items, these bullets are common occurrences, but I have to ask, how does an integration get created and forgotten about? And then, you know, wreak havoc like this. I mean, don't companies have a proper change management process? And well, and I'm bringing this up for a good reason.
It's a good question, Karen.
But you know, I'm just, and I know because I've been doing Salesforce for so many years, and there's a lot of companies that don't do that. But I've never worked anywhere where it was so, you know, unsupervised that something like that could actually happen. But maybe others have.
I'll answer to that question.
Yeah,
How
Shruti.
people forget about the integration because, okay, I work in a company which is a growing company. It's not that big. It's really developing. It's growing. Before I joined, there was only one person or one developer and one product owner who were working. So they never documented anything. Okay, because it was just, yeah, I want, product owner comes up and says, yeah, I want this, I want that. Okay, and the developer's job is, yeah, okay, you need this, fine, I need this much time, I'll just develop it and I'll do it, and then done, boom, we have it there. But now as we are growing, we come up with, so when even I joined like 8 months 9 months back, I don't know anything because everything is in the developer's head,
Right.
like literally in his head, and I don't know. Okay, and everyone knew when I was onboarded, yeah, she's the one who is going to help you with Salesforce questions, and I was bombarded with the questions. Where do this form come from, or how can I make the changes, how can I add the fields? I'm like, okay, I firstly don't know where this is, where this form is. This is a third party tool. I cannot, what, being a developer, being an admin, I basically know where I can find all sort of things. I thought maybe it's a site. I go to the site section, no, there's no site. I go to the communities, there's no community. So if it's not a visual force page, I cannot find anything related to it. And the worst part was the developer was a part-time person. So that's how we never knew. And luckily we have the developer still with us. He joined our company, he joined with me. So fine, we are now trying to document few things. But suppose the person would have left the company, he would have taken all the knowledge with him. And that's how people forget about the integrations, and that's how people forget about what's happening and what's not.
Now, I've never worked for an organization that did a lot of documenting. We managed all of our enhancement projects in Salesforce cases. We had a special record type for it.
Awesome.
And I come to this company where I am now, and I manage all of our enhancements the same way. I built a record type for enhancements, and there's tons of data in it. But I have a new manager who is becoming a stickler for a change management process that it's kind of over the top for something like if you wanted to implement full-blown,
yeah,
and it's been a nightmare. But I mean, I only took over from existing processes and was expected to just continue that way. But now it's like I'm getting retroactively told that, you know, I did it all wrong. But I got a lot of documentation. It's just not the right kind.
I wanted to add, I've been listening to this, and this is near and dear to my heart. And by the way, thank you. I wish we could all hang out all day for many days.
Yeah.
This concept. So I worked for a small private company, and the tool was housed, or it was selected, and it was intended as a sales tool. And, you know, we were less than 500 users, and within a couple of years, we evolved into a publicly traded company, and we had over 1,500 users, and it was spread out through all departments, not just sales, but it was an enterprise tool. And we shifted to engineering and IT. And I remember the engineering VP said, look, you have to go learn change management, you know, these courses on project management, agile, ITIL foundations. He was like, look, you know, we can't be wild, wild west. The days of getting a request in email, a request in Slack, he goes, we have to get all the leadership and business silos to agree to a change management communication process. And it took years. It was painful, but now I'm back at a smaller company, and it is the wild, wild west. And I love Salesforce. I've been at it 8 years, but I am a change management documentation
freak. I'm getting there. Because I know she's right. I just didn't think that I should have been reprimanded for something that was already in place before me.
I remember this guy, he was my VP of engineering, and he said, hey, Craig, his mantra was, rework sucks. and so
At least he sounded like he was having fun with
Right,
it.
he absolutely,
Not putting you in a corner with a dunce hat on or something.
I totally agree. And that's, I think, the difference. What you're trying to say is, one thing to be reprimanded and scolded. And I think that's the uphill battle that I'm fighting right now. Is I created a flow on the homepage that if anybody wants to submit a request, a question, an enhancement, a problem, and trying to get folks, I deal with standard changes, once a week, but emergency changes we'll do, within 24 hours. But getting every department to submit they think that their standard request, hey, that needs to be done right now. And I can have a pipeline of 40, 50 requests, and getting everyone to understand, is this what you're asking? Is it a standard or is it an emergency request? And then two, I would love to hear everyone, how do you ask your company, how do they communicate a request or change? And I would be interested, is it Slack? Is it email? Is it cases? I mean, and how does everyone how do you ask to be informed of change or request?
And that's the question that people should be asking. Craig and David, I would love it, David, if you focused on doing something like this at some point about, let's talk about change management for Salesforce, because as we all know, it is so easy to just go in and make a quick change. So it would be, Craig, I'd love to connect with you outside of here.
Awesome.
Sure.
I would like to add a few points here, because I've also worked in a big company, and I wouldn't take that company's name, but I'll give you a bit of background. So what happened is the company which had the project was with some different ISV partner, different implementation partner. They implemented it for some time, and the new company, like my company, took over from that particular older company. Okay. And then when we were working on the implementation enhancements and everything, we had a very hard time explaining the difference between an incident and a change. Literally people would come up with an incident saying, even if, so for example, if they want to change approver, like in the approval process, if they want to change an approver, they would raise it as an incident. No, this is, of course,
because they needed it done immediately. It had to be done by end of day.
This needs to be done immediately. This is a top priority. No, it's a change. For us, it's a change that we are changing. So we had a hard time explaining them what is an incident, what is a change, what is a priority, what is an impact. So you need to take care of that as well. Even now we struggle with that. And we had to explain them. Did it work? So what we kind of use the strategy is, if something worked before and now it is not working, then that's an incident. It's not something you need to prove it to us, okay? Because people used to come up with big functionalities. Yeah, I was able to submit that product earlier. And then we would say, okay, give me the screenshot. You have it?
I encourage you, and again, David, I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and you were recommended to me by a partner that I work with. I encourage you. This is really Salesforce, and this is if you really want to immerse yourself into change, there's all sorts of resources out there, and just a solution, whether it be, I think there's CBD Nuggets, there's Safari Online. If you guys really want to learn or a resource for change management, the company that I was at, we used it's Untitled Foundations. It's been around probably 25, 30 years, and it's just a framework. It's not an exact, here's how you do it. It's just a framework. And there's video tutorials on Untitled Foundations. Regardless of what solution you use, it really does require putting it in writing, define the plan, and then sit down with your different business units. Because what happens if everybody's used to just getting, hey, what I call a drive-by, they walk by your desk, they come over and they verbally ask you. If you're constantly doing real-time changes on a day-to-day basis, and there's no segregation of severity, the minute you institute this, when you send out an email communication or however you communicate to your company and say, hey folks, here's the new rules, and we only do changes once a week, man, you are going to get pushback and screams from everywhere. And then eventually, once that change starts to adhere, you as a Salesforce admin, when you can pile all your changes and coordinate them and implement,
I think
do
Craig's
that rollout once a week, you become much more efficient. I'm passionate about it, and
Craig's internet is not cooperating.
I know.
That's a funny one.
And he's saying the most important thing.
Poor guy is stuck.
You know, working from home was a big progress. Now I did so much progress working from home.
Yeah. So Craig, you got cut off a little bit. So I'm going to jump in with a couple of things. So first of all, I agree with everything that I heard you say, 100%. Just to also bring it back, I mean, we do have some more content that I want to share with you. Again, it's not meant to be a read along, but something that you touched on, two critical elements, which is the first one, it goes back to the why. Someone has a drive-by and, whether it's, here's a spreadsheet, can you upload it even though the spreadsheet contains many columns that we've never seen before, data that we've never captured in Salesforce before, and they expect you to upload it into Salesforce magically, like within the minute, just like adding an attachment to an email. They think it's that simple. So there's the asking of the why, which to me goes directly back. It all goes back to the business process. You want something, you want to change, you want a modification, whether it's an automation or you want something new appearing on the screen. What business process is it tied to? And by the way, this all goes back to Elements Cloud, because if it's then captured and documented in Elements Cloud, then whether it's the field or the validation rule or the record type can then be tied back, documented there. So everything needs to be connected to each other. It needs to be, the justification needs to be associated to a business process to help answer the why. Why is it that you need this? Who needs it? Is it for everyone or just for you or just for you and your colleagues or just for now as an exception, just for these kinds of deals, these kinds of customers that you're working with? So going back to answering the why. So that's the first thing that I've identified that you brought up, which is tying back the request to like the justification behind it. And the second one is everything associated with the cadence and scheduling and timing of releases. I agree 1,000%. All amazing, very relevant topics. I will definitely turn it into another session that we'll have, maybe several sessions. I don't know, we'll see. For the interest in time, I'm just gonna go back. I wanna make sure that we covered everything except for data cleanup and user interface. And I think we're totally good on time, but I just want to make sure that we stay good on time. And I want to make sure to leave time for additional conversation as needed for these two elements. Data cleanup. Sruti didn't have to remind me, I remembered. So we were talking earlier about, so data cleanup looks like a lot of different things. In order to focus on data cleanup, the first thing that we need to do is we need to identify, what do we mean by dirty data? What is dirty? Dirty could look like a lot of different things. Dirty could be duplicate data. It could be incorrect data. It could be inaccurate data. It could be inconsistent data. In other words, like here you see like states, and you could say, oh, states, you could just implement state and country pick lists. Yes, but that's just an example. It could be job titles, where job titles, people are typing vice president incorrectly. Sometimes it's V period, P period. Sometimes it's all over the place. And then someone says, can you show me a report of all of that? I want to do a mailing. I want to invite people to a webinar. I want to invite everyone with vice president in their job title. Well, what do you mean by that? We have many different versions we're inconsistent in terms of how we're capturing that. So these examples could look like a lot of different things on a lot of different objects. Then we might have some scenarios that violate the business rules. And what do we mean by that? We can have examples where, let's say, all tier 1 customers might have a primary contact, or all accounts in California must be owned by John Smith. And when we actually look at the data does not comply with our own internal business rules. So dirty data could look like a lot of different things. And then, of course, you have the improperly punctuated or misspelled data where vice president is spelled in all kinds of crazy creative ways, or the word chocolate is typed differently, or let's say you have a company, Home Depot as a company is listed multiple times, and each time it's spelled in a slightly different way. So dirty data could look like a lot of different things. In order to address it, we first need to think about, after we can understand what kind of dirty data do we want to tackle, we need to think about what are the different ways that data is getting entered into the system. Because in order to take control of it, we need to start with how is it coming into the system in the first place. Generally speaking, it's coming in one of three different ways. First, manual. Someone is typing into Salesforce and they're entering it in. That's how it's getting into the system. The second one is through a batch entry, some kind of import. Some spreadsheet is coming in from somewhere. We're purchasing a list of everyone who registered for a trade show, attended a webinar, people who subscribe to whatever it is. So we're getting a spreadsheet from somewhere and we're importing it into Salesforce. The third way is through system integrations, which we talked about earlier, which is why I'm asking you to address data cleanup after you understand data integrations. So then we need to think about what is it that we can do in order to address the dirty data within our org. First, we need to identify the dirty data that needs attention. We need to define what is the best strategy in order to address these issues. And we need to figure out how are we going to go ahead and bulk update those records. Now let's bring this back to the context that we were talking about earlier when Shruti brought up about the validation rules. We talked about it before. We have validation rules and users don't fully understand what they need to be populated and why, or certain things need to, certain fields are required to be populated with something until you can get to the next thing. Or you make certain fields just required, so it's not even a validation rule, it's simply required. I can't tell you how many times I've seen in organizations where it's like, yeah, every contact or every lead that gets created must have email address or phone number or date of birth. Well, it's like I mentioned earlier, not every single time that we get introduced to someone the first time, we capture those pieces of information. Sometimes we just don't know those pieces of information. One person tells us about the existence of someone else, and this other person is the most important person that we need to reach out to. Maybe we only have their email address, not their phone number. Maybe we only have their phone number and not their email address. Maybe it's a prospective student who wants to enroll in our school. We don't yet know their date of birth, but date of birth is a required field for any student that gets, or prospective student that gets entered into the database. What do users do? They will make something up. They will type in a period, a question mark, an exclamation point. They will type in any gibberish that they need to in order to hit save on the record. Now you have a database with terrible quality data. You have a lot of junk in the database, and this is terrible. So we need to go back and understand what is it that we need, go back and educate our users. Here's what we need and why we need it, reevaluate for ourselves. The answer is not always technology. The answer is not always make the field required. Sometimes we have different answers, different ways to approach certain things. So that's my general take on addressing data quality in Salesforce. Anyone have any questions on that? I realize I'm going in broad strokes here. I'm trying to be sensitive to the time and give you a general framework.
You nailed it. These are the issues that we encounter all the time, and I call dirty. Yep.
So of course, there are many different apps that can help us when it comes to dirty data. There isn't any one app that's really going to be magical, because in the end, it goes back to the things we talked about before. What the heck do we find as dirty? How are we defining it? None of these apps are going to help us. For example, if let's say Fred Flintstone, his last name has a typo in it. None of these apps are going to help us with that. So apps will help us with only certain kinds of dirty data issues, not everything. So the answer is not always in the next shiny app. But these apps are super powerful in order to be able to address some of the very common issues as it relates to, let's say having consistent data, normalizing the data, making sure that all of the first names are not in all caps, that it's initial cap and everything else is in lower caps, making sure that every time we have vice president represented, that it's represented as VP. So it's VP of operations, VP of sales, instead of having it spelled out if for whatever reason that's what we want as an organization. So these kinds of tools can help with a lot of those kinds of scenarios.
I have to ask you,
yep.
In my scenario, my situation might be different from most people's, but I happen to be working at a company who does not take Salesforce seriously at the very top. Right there, it's just very difficult. So when I'm a real stickler for consistency, you know, databases are all about consistency. When I try to present these ideas to people, they think it's a waste of time, or I don't know what the big deal is kind of mentality. And how do other people try to change an entire ship from going in one direction to another, all by your little lonesome?
It's really hard. You need to have, if you don't have the buy-in from senior leadership within the organization, nothing's going to happen.
Of course, they want the data. They want the data to be accurate when they need it, but they are not. At this, you know, on the other hand, they say, "Oh, we don't trust the data," but they're not requiring all of it to be in the system, and so there's this kind of thing, which is
so
really
to Sky's
crazy.
point, Sky's note in the chat, by presenting it to the end users of what's in it for them. And the way I frame this is in the following way. So I turn to, a lot of times I'm doing end user training and I'm teaching people, let's say, how to log calls, and they're like, oh, that's annoying. What do you, I have to do that for Big Brother? Yeah, because so my boss can track every single phone call that I do, how many calls that I made, and I'm going to be measured based on that.
Right.
I'm like, you know what? Let's make believe for a minute your boss doesn't exist. Okay? Your boss left the company. How about for yourself? I know for myself, when I'm having a conversation with someone, I want to capture notes for myself because I'm working on so many different things. Next time I talk to that person, which might be next week, it might be 2 months from now, it might be 2 years from now, I want to remember the context of the conversation that I had with them. I want to remember what I promised to them, the fact that I promised them that I will follow up with whatever it is by next Tuesday. And I want to be able to capture that. I want to put a reminder for myself. Make believe my boss has nothing to do with it. My boss is never going to look at it. I want to know that for myself, for my future self. I want to make my life easier. I don't have that many brain cells to capture all of that information and retain it in my head. So I want to put it somewhere. I could use a Post-it note. I could use a piece of paper. I could just open up a big old Microsoft Word doc. But Salesforce is a tool that was made to make it really easy. And here the company paid for it, for you to have it. And here I am teaching you how to use it. So that's how I try to frame it. It does not always work, but usually it helps make at least baby steps in the right direction.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anything else that anyone else wants to talk about on the topic of data cleansing to clean your org?
How do you convince your company that demand tools is the way to go? and it justifies the cost. That's what I should say.
The cost is a tough one. What I would say is this. You know what, I'm going to broaden the question and say, how do you justify for any organization to pay something that's expensive, to pay for an expensive tool? What I do is I first start, I will still call out by saying, here's what was, let's say, recommended. Here's what was most highly rated, the most highly rated option for solving the issue that we have. And it's okay, you don't have the budget for it. Okay, that's fine. But at least I called it out. At least I told you about it, made you aware of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try the cheaper options that are available. And don't be surprised when later we find out that it was a waste of time because it actually didn't solve the problem that we actually have. But we'll make the most out of what we can. And then I'll come back and then you'll feel a little bit more justified. So sometimes that helps. So at least you made some dent, you at least justified saying, look, I've tried, I've exhausted, I've done everything that I can with those cheaper or those free tools. And now here I am coming back to you talking about that other more expensive tool. And if they still decide that they don't want to do it, there's only so much you can do.
Do you know of any free batch? Do you know of any free tools that are 100% free that can do locating duplicates in batch? Not trial, but a full-blown in batch.
So if you've defined your duplicate rules in Salesforce, you can run in batch to identify records that hit those rules.
We can't use duplicate management in Salesforce because of a bug with using Process Builder. Yeah.
Okay.
So unfortunately, but we do have a lot of cleanup to do, but I haven't been able to clean it up. Of course, I'm the only one concerned about it, but.
Actually, I'm facing the same problem too.
Really?
Yeah, and I've not seen really good tools out there that can identify other than demand tools. Yeah. Unfortunately, like I'm in the same boat, like the place I'm working won't pay for demand tools.
Right.
I can also get them to sponsor demand tools, and I've used it before, and that's the best one so far.
I found a Find ID, free Find ID tool, which was wonderful, but it's very specific and it will only let you search for 500 records at a time. So there are limitations and it only works in Classic. But so it took me 2 weeks to find 20,000 records in our system. but it was
So
free.
I do a lot of pulling our data into other systems when I have to do that. So pulling it into SQL Server or the data using Workbench and then sending it to our Oracle DBs and say, hey, can you put this in a table for me so I can run some. But it's really hard when you're dealing with the potential volume to find those duplicates.
Yeah.
Could be painful.
Yeah.
I want to touch upon a topic, profiles.
Yes.
So in my organization, so when I recently joined the Salesforce team, so by the time I joined, they messed up the complete profiles thing. So how they have scratch orgs for the developers, and as well as we have QAT environment for QAs and BAs to test it. So profiles were not consistent. The object settings and everything, it's not at all consistent. So what happened was, initially, what they do, they make changes in the scratch org, pull the data into IntelliJ, and then push it to the source code, and then deploy it to the QAT. But then, while doing that process, due to maybe the license, what I heard was maybe the license is issue, maybe scratch org is different license, and the QAT of this different license, it was not working. That's why what they did was they directly made changes in the QAT environment. So right now, when we go to production, we haven't gone to production yet. The issue is nothing's in the source control to push it to the production. Everything is in different environment, which is not good at all. So we want to merge this from QAT to the scratch org and push it to the source control. So when we go to production, it will be stable. So does anyone know like any right now?
I'm exhausted just listening. Oh my God.
I know. You want to find out the differences between the profiles, and is that what you're? Because there is a little app that somebody built that
comparator.
Vina, is that it? That basically what I think Karen hit the nail on the head. I think what I'm also hearing is that you want to be able to compare how is this profile configured in this org versus this other org. Is that right?
Yeah, that how I approach was, so they took the copy of this QAT environment and made separate copy. I was merging this with my scratch org and then checking the changes. One issue that I was facing was, suppose for a profile, I don't want the account and contacts edit permission. I disabled it. So when we disable it, it gives me the error saying convert leads depends on that. So you need to disable this as well. So I did that and I checked in my code. So when some other developer pulls that code into his scratch org, he still gets the same error, even though I have that user permission. I don't know. Maybe it's because, I don't know, it's not disabling it to him. I've seen this issue a couple of times.
It might be when he's creating his scratch org, what he's using for the source to create it might not have that change. Even if you checked it in, because if you're checking it into source and he didn't build from source, you really need to get a good control set on managing that. In terms of source and making sure everyone's pulling consistently. I know that if they've pulled at different times and are working off a different source sandbox, they might not have the same dev hub set up in their CLI on their machine, which could be a problem.
So is this all because of license issues? Does anyone have that issues with the scratch orgs and different
scratch orgs, but when you've got multiple sandboxes that were created at different times, since your sandboxes were originally built from production, as production changes with the licenses it has over time, it could be that those different sandboxes have the licenses that were in place at the time they were created, and production has since changed. So if the one you're using, the QA environment you're using was built, say, 4 months ago, and the developer is now using a developer org they created off of production recently, it might have licenses that QA environment doesn't have.
But there's one functionality, I'm not sure if you know about it. So there's an option of matching the licenses with production. If you go to the setup, somewhere in the company information, you see an option that says that match my licenses with production. So if you do that, it matches all the licenses with the licenses will be updated the same way the production org has. Maybe you can try that.
Thank you, Shruti. Thanks, Linda.
I just want to jump right back because we got 3 minutes at the top of the hour. I want to at least get to this particular section, so I'm sorry. So let's talk about the user interface. After you understand everything that's going on within the organization and your users and the objects and the dirty data and what people need to see and don't need to see, now it's time to actually take it to the surface level of what people actually see within the user interface. So my recommendation over here is first start by listing out all of the objects, both standard and custom objects that are being used within your Salesforce instance, and just start keeping track of what they are and how the progress that you've made in the things that we talked about earlier, which is like, have you reviewed all of the fields? Have you reviewed all of the page layouts? And once you start getting to that level, then you're looking at each field that you have on each object. Field level security, talked about it before. We don't really need to talk about it again. Whether or not they should be required, we talked about it quite a few times as it relates to efficiency, as it relates to practicality, as it relates to data quality. Should it actually be required? Do you need to review or update some pick list values that you might have in some dropdowns? Maybe it's appropriate to set some default values where that's appropriate in order to eliminate some extra clicks that your users have to do. Maybe it's appropriate to populate the native out-of-the-box help text feature to give your users, without any other apps whatsoever, just to give your users a little bit more context, a little bit more guidance on why we have a particular field on the screen. Now, as it relates to the page layout in general, just take a look, and does it make sense, even the sequence, the order, the organization that we have going on the screen? Does it actually make sense to the users? Are fields that should be together, are they actually together on the screen? So many times people just, an admin will just create a field and just move on. They're not even looking where it lands on the page layout. Or it was placed somewhere on the page layout, but then a new section was created, and that orphan field really should be in that same section like all of the other fields of the similar kind, of a similar context, but it was left alone. So take a look and review all of that content. Take a look at even the related lists that you have. Should some of the related lists not appear at all? Should they appear in a different sequence? Should some of them be hidden? You need to look and think through some of those things. On the related list itself, look at the different columns that are being displayed. Maybe for custom objects, if you've done nothing but created a custom object, all you're going to have is the name of the object and nothing else. No other columns are going to appear in that related list. So review all of the columns that you have in the related list to make sure that it's displaying the appropriate and relevant information on the screen. Then go ahead and take a look at list views. Just review all of them. The ones that aren't needed, go ahead and delete them. Maybe some of them should be created and shared with specific groups to help give people the efficiency of leveraging the same list views instead of creating them on their own. Take a look at the reports that you have within the organization. Get rid of those that are not needed. Create folders to create some structure to put reports or dashboards in the appropriate folders to have logical groupings as appropriate for your organization. Take a look at the app manager. Look in all of the apps that you have listed in the app manager and review all of the tabs that you have going on in the navigation, because people in sales might not need to see the tab for cases. If they're not working with campaigns, maybe they shouldn't see campaigns. By the way, I personally recommend that all salespeople should use campaigns for tracking their cold calling efforts, or when they're going on site to visit customers in a certain geographic area. I think they should be using campaigns. But if your organization, they're not using campaigns, then don't put it on the navigation for them. It's clutter on the navigation. It's clutter on the screen. So take a look at all of the apps that you have within each app. Who should see it? For which profiles is it a default? For which profiles is it even cluttered to even see the existence of that app? And then within the app itself, what tabs are included? What tabs should be removed from each of those apps. Same holds true for the App Exchange apps. Just take a look and see what apps are we no longer using. Those that we're no longer using, are we actually still paying a license for them? Because just removing the app does not cancel the license. You need to, if you're no longer using it, cancel the subscription that you have to that app, and then go ahead and actually remove it from the organization. As it relates to the homepage, think about everything that you're seeing on the screen. Is everything there that appropriate for all users? You can go ahead without creating custom homepages. We talked about it before, dynamic page, the ability to have dynamic Lightning components means that as the system admin, you can create one homepage for all of your users, and simply using the dynamic functionality to choose which Lightning component should appear or not appear for certain users. You have one homepage, and each kind of user will see different things on that homepage based on what they are doing within the organization, based on the permissions that were given to them in the org. And the last thing that I have over here is simply in setup, some things to make your own life easier as the admin, to enable inline editing, to enable enhanced lists, to enable collapsible sections, and to enable hover details. Anyone have any questions on any of that? I know I rushed through it. I'm sorry because we're running low on time. Anyone have any questions? We're good? All right. Thank you all for joining. You guys are awesome.
David. You're awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Wash your hands. That's the best advice that I can give you.
Okay.
Don't hit this call. Go wash your hands.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Nice talking with everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks, David.